The ideal way the conversation goes in my world is something like this. Help me understand what you were thinking, feeling at that moment, and then when they explain it to you, I really, really try to understand it to the point where I can say to them sincerely, honestly, I think I get it now. I think I understand where you're coming from.
Welcome, friends, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. Great to have you along. I've got two folks on call here today. Kathy Knochel is a counselor for us here at ACCFS, and Jeff Waibel. Jeff hails from Leo, Indiana. Kathy, we've introduced you to the crowd here not too long back. Great to have you back on.
It's good to be here.
Jeff, this is your first time around here on Breaking Bread. I'd love it if you just introduce yourself a little bit, the role you play there at the ministry.
Yeah, so 19 years ago, I came to work here at Gateway Woods as a counselor. I was fresh out of graduate school, social work, master's degree, doing clinical social work stuff here. I was a therapist here at Gateway Woods for about 8 to 9 years, mostly working with teenagers, also doing family counseling, group therapy, various other things. And at some point there, I took on more of a leadership role with the other counselors and therapists here at Gateway Woods. And ever since then, I have been in leadership of one form or another in our residential program here on our Leo campus. That if you've ever been out for the auction, you've been on our campus, so you know where that all is. That's my background.
And many, I think, can picture that. So thanks for being on. And the key word there you mentioned was teenagers working with youth. And that's exactly the topic that we want to tackle here in this conversation. You know, I mentioned, Kathy, you've been introduced, but let's just say a little bit. Your niche in your previous job was working really in the schools with teens, if I'm correct.
Yes. So I worked both in an outpatient setting with teens. I did just a lot of therapy services with teens with a variety of needs. And then also I worked directly with them through a school system, more like in a crisis role.
Okay. And so we really want to talk about the teenager and caring for the teenager, and specifically the troubled teenager. And Jeff, for all of your glowing resume, you didn't mention that you've got children of your own, and they give us an education. You know, let me just start with this little anecdote. My wife and I were talking to a mother at church, a mother of 4 boys, and she says, "You know that parenting booklet?" And we said, "Yeah." She says, "I'm fanning myself with it." and I know exactly what she means. With a couple of teenagers myself and some soon to be, if we can't laugh, we'd cry.
Yeah.
And I'd like you, both of you, to help us understand the teenager, because I think we need to start there. What do we need to know as it regards to development to help us understand this teenager?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say the very first thing that anybody should do if they want to try to understand a teenager that they happen to live with is to remember that you too were once a teenager and try to think back to those days. My wife has this quote that she got out of a book. We're reading parenting books just like everybody else. She got this quote out of a book, and the book said, "The only thing harder than being the mother of a teenage girl is being a teenage girl." And so I think it's important to try to remember some of those days. I would say that's step one.
And that brings a level of empathy.
Yeah, absolutely.
To help understand. Kathy, what can you tell us about the teenager that's good for us to know?
Absolutely. What Jeff had said about just remembering that is really important. And then I would just say one of the biggest things to remember is that there just is a lot going on inside of a teenager. Their brains are still developing. There's a lot of hormonal changes going on. And for the most part, the behaviors and things that they're communicating is coming from a place of them going from a place of complete dependence on their parents to really trying to gain control and independence over their life.
I think that's really excellent to think about developmentally where they're at. I want to zero in, Kathy, on this behavior, because behavior is the loudest thing, I think, that often we're dealing with our children. As if to say everything would be okay if the behaviors were different. Give us a framework to think through what we're seeing with our teenager, the actions, their behavior, their antics. Is it just that behavior to be corrected, or is there something deeper?
What I have noticed just from the different teens I have worked with, the biggest thing is every behavior that's coming across is communicating some kind of need that's there. And so they may not be able to say, Mom and Dad, I feel like you're not paying enough attention to me, but they will show that to you by the actions and just that in different ways. So I think for parents, being able to understand that, trying to listen more to the words than the actions that are coming, you really learn a lot of what's trying to be communicated.
And that's really difficult when the action is so loud. I can't hardly even see through it or listen past the action. But what you're saying there, I think, Kathy, is a great deal of help. Jeff?
Yeah, so I would say every single action that a teenager does makes logical sense to them. This is something that we do not identify with as adults, as parents, where we see them do something and we're like, that was not a wise decision.
And it's illogical.
It's illogical to us.
Yeah.
It's like, what were you thinking? What were you doing? Well, they were thinking. And what they came up with ended up what they did. And it made perfect sense to them. Maybe it doesn't make sense to them as much now that they think back on it, but at the time it did. So sometimes we just need to drive down into those, what were you thinking at that moment?
Kathy, is that some of the conversation that you have?
Yes, absolutely. Just like Jeff had said, it makes perfect sense to them. And teens don't have the experience that we as adults do, or necessarily the perspective. And so being able to help them identify the different thoughts that were going on leading up to the event, the different feelings that they were feeling, and really trying to better understand that from all angles. And sometimes it's about hearing them get through the piece of saying the things that don't make a lot of sense, like telling parents, you don't love me, you never let me do these things, whatever those things that are coming across. Sometimes those words just kind of help drive down a little bit deeper on what's going on.
I really like that. And really, we've kind of now painted two different things to consider as parents, or as Sunday school teachers, or as grandparents, whomever a teacher interacts with these young folks. One is finding that logical process that Jeff said is there and uncovering it through inquiry. And the other one is how to sit in that moment with appropriate reaction. Do you see how I see these two separate battles?
Yeah.
Because I see within me is rising up a response to the accusation that you don't love me. But I need to probably let that go at some level. So anyway, I would love to keep filling these two spaces out. One is the mechanics of how do I navigate myself in this moment, and the other one is the skill set of uncovering what it is they're communicating. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of these conversations over the years with teenagers, some of which live in my house, some of which I've had the privilege of working with here at Gateway. And there are ways to dive into those types of things. I would say the tricky business here is that every person is different. And so there is no one-size-fits-all magic golden question that if I just ask this question, I'll get the response that I'm really looking for. You got to know your child. You have to know your kid that you're working with. Some of them you can ask direct questions, and some of them you just can't. There's some of them who all you have to do is get them alone, and they'll spill their guts. Some of them already feel guilty and want to talk about it. And some of them are masterful at the one-word answer, like no, yes, can I go now? Just those types of things. So you got to know the personality of your child. And so sometimes you can use humor. Sometimes you can use direct questioning. Sometimes it's more helpful to text them. I mean, as crazy as that sounds, and as maybe
enter their world.
Yeah, and as outside of our comfort zone as that might be, sometimes that's the right approach. I think what's crucial, though, is as you ask them questions, you listen with an open mind. The ideal way the conversation goes in my world is something like this. Help me understand what you were thinking, feeling at that moment. And then when they explain it to you, I really, really try to understand it to the point where I can say to them sincerely, honestly, I think I get it now. I think I understand where you're coming from. And then the next part of the conversation is, can you understand what it looked like from my perspective? Trying to get there.
So what I hear with that, Jeff, is that thinking-feeling question is really first not about you correcting their thinking and feeling as much as for you to understand their thinking and feeling.
I think that's ideal.
And then you didn't even move to correcting that thinking and feeling in the second part. The second part was, here was my thinking and feeling based on your behavior.
Yeah.
trying to reciprocate that empathy. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've launched into correction way too early, I'm learning here in this conversation.
Yeah, I would say so. And we're glad we could help correct that for you, Matt.
Yes, yeah. I think the benefit of waiting too, it's a double benefit for you to be able to know how you want to respond as the parent or just the adult in the situation. And it also just gives the teen time to calm down and reflect. Jeff had said earlier, sometimes it seems illogical what they're saying and doing. And at times teenagers are able to come to the point of saying, yes, this was an overreaction. But in the moment, it's very unlikely they're going to be able to see all of the different perspectives in it.
I learned pretty early in my teaching career, working with young people, that I could put a young person in a corner that was a no-win situation for them, and it was always tragic results. If I put them in a place, for example, that would demean them in front of their peers, they would sooner be expelled. So there's a wherewithal, too, about even the time and the place, as you mentioned, how to do it, and doing it in a way that there's some sort of safety.
Such a great point. There's a guy who works here at Gateway Woods who says, always give a person a corner to retreat to in any conversation. Give them a corner to retreat to. Don't chase them down so hard that they feel like they have to fight. They have to get into it with you. I, by the way, am not good at that. Let me say it better. This will be the first thing I repent of during this podcast. I am...
First of more?
The first of many. I am good at that with other people's kids. I am less good at that with my own kids.
Yeah, I will agree. I feel like I'm a much better parent to other people's kids. Why? And one reason, I think, Jeff, is I panic much sooner with my own.
Sure.
And there's never been a moment in my life that panicking has really brought about good gains. And in parenting, it has not.
Oh, my goodness. So Kathy will correct everything that I say here, but I think there's a whole bunch of things that kind of play into this. First of all, we do share some genetics with them. And so at some level, we see ourselves in their behavior, and that panics us because, oh, my goodness. And maybe this isn't even all at the conscious level. Maybe some of it is subconscious, but we see something in them that we also recognize in ourselves, and we're like, oh no, I tried so hard to keep them from going down that road, and here they go. So I think that's at least part of it, is we share some genetic code with them. I think part of it is we have been harping on this for weeks, if not months, if not years, and surely they should know it by now. And so we kind of get exasperated in that way. What don't you understand about this? We've talked about it so many times. So just some of that frustration leaks through.
Yeah. Well, Kathy, you've had the opportunity to come alongside parents, and you've made a career of it, right? So there is and both you and Jeff have, there is a value in other people coming alongside the parenting of a teen, right?
Yes, definitely. And I would say, too, just to add on to what Jeff had said, I actually agree with everything you said there, Jeff. But I would say that as far as coming alongside, what I have had the privilege of doing is working with parents to remind them that their brain is under construction, right? And construction zones are messy all the time. And so that is kind of the same thing that's going on with the behaviors and things that they're doing. And so, yeah, I think coming alongside them for support and also getting support from other parents in their peer group is really important.
I want to come back to what's under construction, Kathy, because I think that's key. So we're going to come back to that. But I want to button up a little bit this messy situation of parents. There's a lot of parents with a great deal of regret. I know why they did that.
Yeah.
Because I've let that go. And I'm not sure at 17 I can do anything now. That's a regret. Or, that disciplinary action was clear out of line. I regret that. We all have regret. But it's one thing to have regret with my career and with how I spent my money. It's another thing to have a regret when it comes to my children.
The stakes are so high.
The stakes are so high. Speak to parents, Jeff, that have a great deal of regret right now, and they're wondering what the future looks like.
So maybe my answer will build on something that Kathy was saying earlier, but My favorite parenting analogy, especially for the teenage years, is that of an ice rink. And this is not original to me. I found this somewhere. So this is shamelessly stealing somebody else's analogy. So that's the second thing I'll repent for.
Well, you admitted it, so you did.
Yeah. So think about, I don't know if you ice skate, but think about
I do.
your first time stepping onto an ice rink with skates. Basically, you strap knives to your feet, and then you step on the slipperiest surface on earth. So that's
Somebody tells you it's a good idea.
it seems like a good idea at the time. So you step onto it and you go down, and that teaches you something like, okay, I have got to get some support. So you find the nearest wall and you pull yourself up, and for the next half hour, you are essentially hugging the wall while you skate. And then every once in a while, you let go of the wall for just a minute, find yourself in trouble, grab the wall. And then after a half hour of that, you might let go for a little bit longer time. After a while, you get so adventurous that you actually skate away from the wall, only to find yourself in trouble. You've figured out how to skate, but you haven't figured out how to stop. And so you go headlong into the wall, and you just hit the wall as hard as you can imagine. Okay, in this analogy, the skater is your child, and you're the wall. And so I think what parenting is this exercise of being there and holding steady and being a touch point for kids who are desperately trying to learn how to skate. So they're going to do things that are unwise. They're going to have some falls. Be there so that they can get back up. They're going to go away from you, and that's going to feel scary to you, and it's going to feel challenging to you, and you're going to miss them. But don't you dare stay in their lives when they very appropriately need to learn how to skate. The worst thing the wall could do is insist on being there when they're trying to learn, but be there. And sometimes they're going to come back so hard that you're going to get banged up in the process. So I just think so much of parenting years in the teenage years is like that. It's this constant looping of children going away from you and then back to you, and away from you and then back to you. Sometimes when they come back, it's brutal. Sometimes when they leave, they push off, and that can feel brutal. I just think that for me, that just explains so much.
I really like that too, Jeff. And it also gives us a context for the hurt we see that our kids incur.
Yeah.
And they will. It's just like every skater does. They've got the bruises to show for the mastery of the game and the activity. And then our kids will have that too, and that's part of this process of launching those kids. Let's go now to that construction piece. You said they're under construction. Construction zones are messy. I would like a few pointed things that they are growing in. We've mentioned they're developing. Still, that's too vague. They're under construction is too vague for my simple mind. I'd like some touch points to say this is an area they're growing in, so it's a construction zone. And this might be how you need to handle that area and understand how it impacts your interactions.
Okay, so from a brain development standpoint, I think the thing that we typically talk about is the development of the prefrontal cortex, which is this area right in the front. That's why we call it prefrontal. It's right behind your temples.
That you hit your head as you fall forward on the ice.
Yes, that's the one that's most damaged when you hit the ice really hard. So the development of that prefrontal cortex has a lot of implications. So let me just walk through a few. One, that's where personality resides for the most part. Well, kids are still developing that. So you're going to see some personality changes as they continue to develop that. By the way, research suggests that that prefrontal cortex isn't completely developed into your mid to late 20s. And so this is not by the time they hit legal age of 18 or heaven forbid 21 for certain things, that they're going to be there. That's probably not the case. So personality's up there. That would include things like their sense of humor, which is really interesting. So sense of humor is something that they're continuing to develop throughout this time. They might find things funny that you don't, or they might find things not funny that you think are hilarious. So that
never happens
never,
at my
happens.
house. Oh, they think my jokes are the funniest things. Oh, they love it.
But perhaps the biggest implication, especially for parenting, is that that's the part of the brain where we measure risk. And so they're going to measure risk wrong at times. And so they're going to take risks that most of us wouldn't take. My classic example when I talk about this with folks here at Gateway is, as a kid, I would drive motorcycles through fields, and not dirt bikes because we were too dumb with no prefrontal cortex involved. So we would take road bikes, motorcycles through fields, which is a very, very scary thing to do. And then
Bad idea.
Yeah, we would do it 60 miles an hour. And as an adult, I look at that and I was like, is that person suicidal? What's going on in their head there? No, they're just not measuring risk quite right. And
to link back to what you said previously, it logically made sense in your head.
it logically made sense at the time. Yeah.
And that explains a lot of conflict when a parent addresses an issue, whether it be drug use, for example, or other risky behavior. It's a no-duh for us, and it's not for them.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And this is where I'm going to cut in on today's conversation with Kathy and Jeff. When we come back, we're going to pick up right where we left off about this messy construction site and what is under construction. Thanks, each one, for being with us.